Araira, without further ado, tuahine, tuakana, Jared, Rangimārie, tēnā kōrua, nau mai ki te whare kōrero, kaihara kōrua.
Kore taia te whaka...
Kei konei māua...
Kore taia.
Paia na. Can hear your beautiful voices.
Oh, the host... Oh, yeah,
here we go.
Got that.
Oh,
stop it. Nā reira, ko ai kōrua, no hea kōrua.
Pai o tuatahi, me mihi ka tika kia koutou, kua whakatau pai ia māua i tēnei rangi mokopuna. I rangona e au, i te maiwa tana i ruti a koe, taku tuakana kaweti. He ātāhua te kite, te rongo i tō reo, i tō waiata, o tira ki nā kōrero, ki nā karakia i tīmata i tēnei hui. Nā reira, he mihi nui, he mihi maioha mō tēnei whakatau. Ko Jared Hiakita hau, aha ko kei te noho tēnei nono, kei runu i te hiku o te ika, no te puku ke hau o te ika. So yeah, I'm Jared Hiakita. I hail from Tūhoi. From a little settlement on the northern edge of the Urewera, one of our beautiful national forests, a place called Waimana, Te Waimana Kāku. And for the last 5 years, I've been very fortunate that this woman right here dragged me up to the hokianga, and we've been building, self-building our own papakainga here, off-grid home. And it's an ongoing kaupapa, ongoing project. But I he ko kai ngākau tia ahau ki te kaupapa o tēnei hui, ko te kai, ko te whakatipu kai, ki te, just building, growing, learning about kai, how do we grow healthy kai? How do we do it in a way that's positive and replenishing of the whenua that food is grown upon, so that every next generation can experience the abundance of that same whenua. So really, really interested in all of these things, and it's just a real honour to be here. So thank you, Toi Tangata, for having me, and I'll hand it up to Rangi.
Ai atamari e koutou, ko Rangimārie Mules tōku ingoa. Nei rā te mihi maioha kia koutou, kua tai pai mai, tai ora pai i te ata nei. He uri tēnei o ngai tahu o te ateaua no ngā whānau Alison me taiaroa. Aha ko tēnei tipu ake au ki raro i ngā maunga o Pangaru o Papata, ki te taha o te whanga o hokianga nui a kupe. Kei konei e nohana tōku whānau ki konei. Mō ngā reanga e ono. So a long time that my whānau has lived on this whenua as Kaitiaki on the north side of the hokianga, and I was born and raised here as the 5th generation, and our son now is the 6th. But I hail from, my tātai whakapapa comes from the rich lines of Ngaitahu in the south, which has a really unique and interesting food narrative in terms of our inability to cultivate kumara, so then that adaptation to that environment. So I'm really, really interested in everything kai. I love eating it, I love sharing it and cooking it, I love growing it, and I love talking about it. So really, really excited about this panel this morning and sharing it with our bro kawiti, and exploring and digging ruku hohonu e pāna ki tēnei ngā āhuatanga katoa te ao kai. So I runga I te raka hoa tu te rākau korero ki a koe hoa.
Tēnā kōrua. Ka hoa tau ki te rākau korero ki a koe, Haylee, paku whakamārama ko ai koe, no hea koe?
Kia ora, morena tātou, ko Haylee Koroi tōku ingoa. Ko whakarongorua te maunga, ko awanu I te wā ko ngā tigimata whaurua te waka, ko mokono I arangi te marae ko te ngahi te hapu, ko te rarawa ko ngā puhi, ko ngā tikahu, ano hoki o kuiwi. Ko te āhua nei, he hui tai toki rau tēnei, kei te noho ahau ki tēnei taha o te hokianga ki o Māpere. Yeah, so I'm in hokianga at the moment in o Māpere. We're only 2 weeks here actually. We were living in Hokitika in the South Island, Te Waipounamu, only 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm a bit disorientated even though I'm home. But that's the nature of taiao, I guess. So yeah, just still trying to find my feet in the land and the bush and the salt water. So yeah, tēnā koutou, tēnei ata. Oh, also, I suppose I should give my job title. So formally, I had to Google this morning on our website, but formally, I'm the training and nutrition lead here at Toi Tangata, but I prefer to think of myself as a kaiarahi kai Māori because that's a little bit more, it's an easier driver for me in terms of doing my mahi. So kia ora tātou.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, I'm so excited to whānau. Kaupapa kai. Yeah, let's go. We're just going to roll with it. So, pātai tuatahi. He aha, he ai kia tāi tiro, kia tātai tirohanga, titiro. He aha tēnei mea te kai Māori, o tira te pūnaha kai Māori. Unpacking that, like, you know, how do you broadly understand, or what's your understanding of kai Māori and Māori kai systems? Yeah, we'll go kind of whānui, and then we might come in and hone in on little specifics. Yeah. Tīmata kia kōrua. Tukua.
Kia ora, my bro. Yeah, o tīmata mai te whakaaro e pāna ki te kai Māori I te kaumara. My ancestors came to Aotearoa on a waka called Mātātua. And there was a special reason that waka was built and came to Aotearoa. And so the story goes is that there was people already existing in Aotearoa before all of the great migrations, and they're referred to as Ngā Pōtiki, Te Apu Onioni. And these are iwi peoples that specifically come from Waiariki, Bay of Plenty area. That's who I whakapapa from, and our kōrero talk about we descend from those people who are from this land. One day anyway, some 2 bros from Hawaii came to Aotearoa, and they came across these people who were living in kakaharua, which is whakatane. And these people welcomed them and went to feed them some aruhe, some dried fern root, and they thought, oh, this is no good. This tastes like wood. And hence the term toi korero, which is another iwi, toi korero, te tēnea toi. But anyway, so these brothers brought with them kumara from Hawaii, and it was dried, and they fed it to these people who greeted them. And to their delight, this delightful, sweet, starchy kumara was so tasty that they actually commissioned these brothers to make a waka and take them back to Hawaii to retrieve kumara and bring it back to Aotearoa. And so that was done. These brothers and some people from Toi Korero went back to Hawaii. And then a bunch of people from Hawaii decided, oh, we want to come back to Aotearoa as well and check out what's going on. So then they decided we need an even bigger waka. And that waka was Mātātua. So they built that waka, Mātātua, and that was the vessel that was made to carry kumara back to Aotearoa. So for my people, and that you know, our kōrero and our experience of kai Māori, to me, that's where I guess it's at the core. Kumara is very core to what kai Māori is. And in the modern day, I think, you know, we have expanded far beyond just kumara, obviously, and we've adapted kai Pākehā and given it a new Māori brand. For instance, Boil Up, you know, that's a Māori kai, but it's basically filled with introduced foods. Doughboys has flour in it, which is, you know, not Māori. You know, beef ain't Māori, brisket ain't Māori, if we're thinking in a real traditional sense. But, you know, kai Māori is a very new thing. I mean, it's a thing that we evolve and adapt with, and it's beautiful. It's lovely. I love those beautiful fatty brisket boil ups and the cloudy fluffy doughboys and all of that. But you know, as we you know, grow and learn, you know, I'm sort of moving away from you know, the gluten and the processed foods and you know, just trying to eat a bit more whole foods, more whole food based diets, more organic, all of those sort of things. As if we talk about kai Māori, what does Māori mean? It means normal. It means you know, natural. So for me, you know, organic food isn't really thought of as necessarily kai Māori. Not a lot of Māori eat organic food, but when I think about what is Māori, it's organic. So for me, eating organic, that's an expression of my Māoritanga, because it's natural kai, it's untainted from chemicals, pesticides that are going to transition into my own system and affect my own health. So, you know, there's so many ways we can go with it. You know, what is kai Māori, but I'll just leave it at that.
Absolutely. That might, when we'll just park that and we might come back to that, unpacking that, those social constructs of kia te neme te Māoris and associated with kai. I just want to me hoki atu he pito kōrero te whakahoki atu.
Kia ora. Hoki atu.
I think it's a really important point, just pulling off that kaupapa around Māori kai. You know, what does it mean to, well, one, be Māori, two, be ngai tohu or no te atiawa, and three, be actively engaged with my local environment. And so those are all questions at a philosophical level, but also at a real practical level that we need to be critically asking ourselves. Is kai is inherently a cultural expression. Kai is inherently a nutritional need, that we need our tinana to exist, to be nourished, to thrive upon our planet. And we have to take all those complex elements of kai and understand that for ourselves. So when I think about kai Māori, I kind of think actually we need to be digging deeper into, well, what does it mean to be Māori, to be a tangata whenua, as in someone who ingests your local environment, and how, and that kai Māori is the point where you ingest your local environment through your kai that you've grown. All of that bacteria then starts colonizing your gut, and that becomes kai Māori, because it's that beautiful synchrony between our external environment and our inner system, our inner self. And when those two things meet through the digestive system and start becoming part of our microbiome and part of our structure, we then start being Māori. We start being, it becomes ordinary, it becomes part of our system, and we build this symbiotic relationship with our outside environment, our local environment, and our internal environment. That's when it kia Māori te tū, kia Māori te ora. So it is a really, I mean, inherently kai is such a complex thing, and we can think about it, oh, you know, you get a packet of chips or whatever, but actually ki te Māori, he mea tino hohonu, he pau toko manawa o tō tātou nei ao, is kai. So we have to start having more complex conversations about the language we use around it and how we understand that narrative and relationship to taiao.
Beautiful. I mean, there's so much I want to unpack in that, those te rā pito kōrero. You know, the social aspects, the language aspects, the social aspects around kai and how we relate to it, the language we use around it and what that means to us around kai, and then you know, microbiome, like there's a whole nother kōrero and stuff in that. And even, you know, yeah, like, you know, let's go there, let's go there, and let's go there. And also it reminds me of, you know, kia tangata whenua I te tangata. When does that, how does that process occur? When does that process occur? Because we also have other kind of perceptions around that too. Engari kia, and you know, there's the practical way of how we describe what tangata whenua is, and then who we are as tangata whenua in relationship to other people's being on this whenua of Aotearoa. So yeah, and then that brings into all the emotional stuff around that as well. So yeah, I don't know, Haylee, he whakaroa ke anō hei tāpiri before we jam into some of those take?
Yeah, I suppose when I think about the kupu Māori and this idea of normal or natural, I think the taiao first and foremost shows us what that means and looks like. And it's our job to align with the taiao. And I think the last year while I've been spending time in the bush down in Pukatika near Lake Kaniere, I really had the opportunity to be in relation with a lot of native foods, foraging, piko piko and kareao and hakeke and things like that. And so I think it's interesting to think about kind of that as the foundation, or thinking about our native ecosystems as the foundation from which we can extend upon food. So we can start thinking about how foods that aren't necessarily from here, or people that aren't necessarily from here, can also align their behavior or align their kind of, so how we can align those with native systems so that they don't, so we're not bringing in new foods to the point that they disrupt native systems, but they can become an extension and be in good relation with native systems that already exist. And that's a lot of what I've learned in regards to being in relation with native foods. But then there's also the other taha, which is that we're seeing, like, I suppose, an emergence of returning to taiao, but also the simultaneous decline of taiao. And so how do we forage while also maintaining the mana, like the Māori of these places that we're foraging from? And I think that's a really hard thing to understand, and maybe, yeah, just a conversation that needs to be had.
I can see you've unmuted yourself, bro. Tokua. How whakaaro?
Oh, I unmuted him. Jared.
She had to unmute me because I was getting a bit excited over here.
Oh, bro.
Yeah, far out. So many potent points have just been touched on. And yeah, I guess just bouncing off the korero that our tuahine just shared, it's a really challenging world to navigate in terms of how do we embody and enact Kaitiakitang on an everyday level, because just by being born into this world, we are participating members in the destruction of our environment. Our very way of life is harmful to whenua takutai awa moana nahere. So, you know, like, how do we work with that? And we're forced into the situation. We're chained to systems that keep us going to the grocery store, buying inorganic food, you know, like buying plastics and stuff. There's no blame here or judgment on anyone. It's just that this is the situation we're in, and how can we move forward and move out of it? So one thing that I personally think about and aim for in this short life that I get to experience upon this beautiful world is to live in a way that restores and enhances the environments and ecosystems that are impacted by my everyday activities. So every day when I go to work, when I'm at home, when I'm building, what can I do to achieve an existence that is enhancing of life, not taking away from it, not depleting it, not destructive? Now, this is a lofty aim, but it's important for me just to keep it in mind. I don't think I'll achieve that completely in my life, but I know that if I try, I'll get to a certain point with that, and I'll be able to unplug from many of the systems that are harming our taiao, and then I'll set up a platform for my son or others to go even further with it from there.
Beautiful, bro. What kind of things have you already started to implement in your fellas' lives around that whakaaro of not unplugging, but finding another huarahi, another way, another paradigm? Maybe even starting off with your own home. You mentioned, you know, you're building up a pakainga. what kind of whare do you fellas live in, and what are some of the things that you've already been able to change in terms of systems that align to that?
Yeah, so 5 years ago, I guess it was a bold decision to move home. And when we say that, it wasn't just moving down the road, it was moving down the end of a dirt road in the North Hokianga, back to a room on the veranda of my parents' house where I grew up, which had its own challenges, right? You know, going from that kind of lifestyle of being a young independent couple with all those career things, and then coming home and being part of that collective and slotting into whānau life, intergenerational life. What we started doing was we built a tiny house on a trailer, which at the time seemed like a mean as idea, because we had this, I guess not a fear, but like a whole heap of barriers to going into the mortgage, going into being in debt to external forces that, one, we don't understand, and two, we would have to be controlled by for a long time in our adult life. So we decided that we would start our life together and our adult life together in a place of kind of rebuilding and reclaiming and living within our means. So investing in the things that we could afford to invest in, not going into debt over. So the tiny house worked for that reason. And since then it's rippled out, and we've decided, oh, actually, that was a cool little process to test our whakaaro around how we might be self-empowered in this process and work towards that tino rangatiratanga in our own context, using our own decision-making and the resources that we have at hand. So then that equated to, well, we don't want to be paying a bill for power every month. So invest in solar panels so that we can start building that self-reliance, reliance within our own systems, fencing off a part of the whenua, and then trying to figure out how to get on top of kaikuia, which is up to our hips, without using Roundup, which we didn't really foresee this being a challenge, but, you know, a whole heap of people kind of going, it ain't going to happen if you don't use Roundup, kind of thing. And so
on
then
fully
we had
clayed
to,
soil.
yeah, on fully clay soil. So then we had to invest in learning, right? So that meant that we had to start making time and investing resource into actually learning some new ways of deconstructing our idea of gardening and starting to work with ecosystems and environment to actually harness the potential of our whenua. So that was a whole nother journey in terms of learning, unlearning, relearning, all of that. Since then, it's kind of snowballed out, and now we're in this kind of radical process of investing in everything that isn't on grid. And so and it's you know, started from that tiny house that, you know, it was a small investment, I guess, to do a tiny house, but since then now it's become a bit of an addiction, and now we're like, oh, we need an electric car so that we don't have to pay for petrol. Also, we don't want to be putting all of those fossil fuels back into our atmosphere. If we're trying to do positive for our ecosystem here, we have to do positive for our ecosystem here. And so all of those things have started kind of coming together and making sense. It's taken a few years for all of the components of our system to start talking to each other. You know, our gravity-fed water, our solar panels, our car, our gardens, and they're starting to synchronize. And so we're starting to see how that slow system change has been incremental across 5 or so years, but it's starting to hum a little bit more. It's been clunky for a lot of those 5 years, but that vision of unplugging, unlearning, decolonizing we're starting to see kei te puta mai ngā hua o tērā whakaaro, o tērā mahi, and it's becoming, you know, we're starting to feel the hum, but we've got a long way to go, and we get that.
And it's important to note as well that, you know, I think, you know, when you go on the off-grid kind of pathway and you get solar panels and electric car or whatever, like those things, they're extractive industries, and they're definitely, I don't see those sort of things as the long-term answer to the challenges we face, environmental challenges, because they're extractive. They're about taking from papatūānuku, mining minerals, mining materials, making plastics, so that your solar panels can function. So I don't want to sit here and sound like, hey, we're like super environmental because we got an electric car. I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's to me it's not the answer to the root of the issue.
It's really interesting, because it's somehow we've got to reconcile te ao hurihuri e neho nei tātou, me ngā wawata, me ngā hia e hihia tiana mo tua, mo te paitawhiti. So like, yeah, I love that. I love that, you know, it's the step. There's steps in a direction that is aligning with your deepest, most values, your core values, and your wants for your uri whakatupuna. Mihi ana. Totally beautiful. E whakaro atu anō, Haylee?
Yeah, I think in terms of things that have really, like in terms of practical, I find that changing, like incrementally changing the way we even understand and think about foods is directly related to the way that we practically convey our relationship with food and food systems. And being in Hukatika, I think first and foremost, the thing for me was, if it's raining, we can't put our washing out. Like, and it's raining like 2 out of 3 days a lot of the time there. And so first and foremost, it was about slowing down and responding to the timing of the taiao, because I think we create a lot of false urgency, and society creates a lot of false urgency, but urgency can actually be conveyed in the way that taiao is speaking to us. So for example, we might get tohu from the taiao that soon there's going to be fruit coming forth, and that's an urgency we need to respond to, because if we don't, whatever, the birds might get it first, it might have blown away with the wind. And so I think slowing down and responding to the timing of taiao has been really informative in terms of my everyday practice. We don't have to work ourselves into the ground, and I think that idea of kind of like grinding is very much derives from a capitalist kind of perspective of relating to the world, and it like tries to override the way that taiao communicates timing, as if we're, as individuals, as if we're machines, as if there's no off button. And so I think in my body, like in a somatic or visceral way, it feels better to move slowly. And that allows me to think more practically about what I can do in my everyday life. And I think it's really important to think about the ways that colonization has shaped our relationships with one another and with food systems. Because if we can imagine a future in which colonization doesn't exist anymore, for me, that's really just about every day thinking about how I'm going to better my relationship to taiao, because kind of the underlying logic of colonization is to disrupt those relationships. And so if we move forward with whanaungatanga at the center and just thinking about, oh, we have some pots on the deck, we've only been here for 2 weeks, but we managed to get some herbs into those pots. Trying to find small ways to familiarize myself with taiao and sink back into the timing of the hokianga, which is completely different from Hukatika in lots and lots of ways. But yeah, I think time is a really central part of how we make sense of things and how we make sense of food systems, and can be really transformative in terms of changing our practice.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And you know, talking about maramataka in that sense, and how you say that listening to taiao, te maata tiro tiro I ngā tohu, you know, there's a time and place for everything. And as you say, like there's this false sense of urgency, but even down to the kind of your own, like, oh, I need to eat breakfast, then I need to eat lunch, then I need to eat dinner, and all that, like even that kind of stuff, wasn't that created by the food industry anyway? And then like that's meant to be every day. We have no seasons or times or kaupeka where we observe scarcity, which at a biological level, evolutionary level, we've always had as human beings. Yet nowadays, the system that we live in, we don't experience that. So what effects at a genetic level, at a evolutionary level, generational level, is that going to have on us? He whakaroa a kōrua, Jared.
I think the point in our history where food became a commodity is a massive thing for us to address. When the Industrial Revolution started kicking in the 18th, 19th century, and we started, machinery started amping up production and replacing the human connection to taiao, when factories and jobs made our people urban, when food, the transference of food from one person to another became a transactional thing rather than a manaki thing. And I think those are points in our kai narrative as Māori and as modern people that we need to actually address, because the whole commodification of kai has resulted in this massive disease of deficiency, and we're all walking around being born into a world of deficiency, and we need waste and all of the spin-offs like that come from that, being a consumer only of the food cycle, and not kind of defining the whole loop of food. You know, if you think about it, like the one example is our total of this disease of deficiency is our total imbalance between the fatty acids, so our omega-3s and omega-6s, and that the modern diet, because of this commodification of food, we're eating so much processed food, hyper-processed food, and it's really, really high in omega-6s, right? It's all those sunflower oils, you know, all of those flours and all of those things, and it's actually disrupting the balance of our fatty acids and brain development and the ability for our nerve cell endings to actually make connections and dock properly. So then we're getting this imbalance of serotonin and dopamine, meaning we're not learning from our reward or punishment systems that our brain are signaling through that dopamine connection, and the other is around mental health, and you know, like all of those things are all so intertwined. And that's where, you know, I think we need to really address that point in our history where our food narrative went from a cultural expression of aroha and love and mana into that place of commodification, and we need to unlearn and kind of reclaim that space, whatever that looks like in modern times, because it's incredibly damaging to not only our biophysical self, our brain development, our, you know, when he pepe he roto I te kōpū, that development of our babies as a pregnant mama, what that looks like for our babies if we've got all these deficiency within our own system. So I'm really passionate about this. I think it's a real innately political statement to reclaim the control over our kai, and it has to be done. We have to address these points in our food narrative that have taken us to a place where our control, our sovereignty, all of that has been taken away from us.
Right. Yeah, one way I think about growing our own kai, and I think that for many Māori, it seems to naturally include whānau and papakainga, a connection to home, a connection to papa tuanuku, to past times of pakeke and kui and kraua and tipuna, because we all hear stories within our whakapapa only 1 or 2 generations back of amazingly lavish and abundant, massive gardens. And it's as if the idea of growing kai does not exist within the Māori mind without a whakapapa that binds us to our kin and to the land from which we each call tūranga waiwai. But unfortunately, so disconnected is the reality of the situation today that the vast majority of whānau Māori and just people in general are now forced to outsource the growing of their entire diet to a system that has zero regard for whakapapa, no regard for Kaitiakitang, but maximum concern for profit. And this is an unfortunate reality, but it is the situation we have at hand, and one we must acknowledge, one we must work through, and one that can be changed.
Tautoko.
Hei apiti ake ki ngā kōrero. I think it's really important to think about the kind of the roots of capitalism, or like how that really took place here in Aotearoa, and that was with the loss of land. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge land loss as a really key reason that our whānau are unable to engage in kai whakapapa. I just think about Hirangi Heke's kōrero about how health or well-being is a reflection of taiao, and if taiao is shops, if taiao is different fast food stores, then I don't think it's useful to necessarily point at individuals and claim that they aren't kind of like their health issues are an individual issue, because if our individual health is a reflection of taiao, then I think there's a system at large that is creating rules on the ground that has implications for people. Even when I think about this idea of obesogenic environments, I think we need to go a step further and recognize that what are the relationships that Kai is reinforcing for us. So if the solution to obesogenic environments is just having supermarkets, what we're saying is have this relationship with this massive multinational company, as opposed to having a relationship with taiao. So I think rather than the solution to obesogenic environments being just having healthy food available, which is a good intermediary step, but I think te pai tawhiti is kia whakaora anō te taiao. So creating space for people to be in relationship with taiao, with healthy water, with healthy ngahere. And then I think that will reflect health back to the people.
Absolutely. And you know, on top of that, you've got this like engineered dopamine hit level of sugar and salt and fat in that whole system that then gets into the psychology and the emotions of the people at the same time. It's like everything's geared to just really, really hold everybody in this paradigm. Yeah, there are so many things. I like what Hannah said. This is making me think about how relationships with Kai are also so tied up with Western beauty standards and diet culture. Tika, I wonder how we can be in a good relation with Kai in this context. Yeah, totally. Yeah, there are so many things right now. Has anyone got like a really burning thing that we'll just, oh yeah, Rangi, sure.
I think that's a really good point from Hannah around Western beauty standards and diet culture. So, man, being stick thin and incredibly depleted in terms of the nutrients you need, I don't know how that's beautiful. And so I think that's part of that process of decolonizing our ideas of and those narratives that we've been fed. Because when I see a healthy mama who's like hapu and glowing, and I just think, man, that's a lucky baby, you know, because your baby first and foremost gets everything from you. First and foremost, you know, will take all of the nutrients from you before you consume it yourself. And so I think it's really important. But then when if we think about beauty standards and diet culture, you know, our current Western culture around clothing, you know, and how all these synthetic clothes and stuff are all, every time you wash polyester, microplastics go into our way. And so it is all connected. And so when I talk about all of the infrastructure that we've invested in here, it's to try and limit that impact on our environment, but also going off what Haylee said is about reading and getting our energy sources from taiao as well, so that when it's a sunny day, we're like, yes, we can do washing, you know, but if it's not, then we got to limit our practice to be responsive to what that te āhuatanga o te rara. So we have to, you know, really actually be in sync with, if it's 3 gloomy days, less energy that we're going to get. So we change our behavior, we change how we interact on that day. So it is all intertwined, and you can't take away kai over here and fashion over here are all, you know, intertwined. And so it's a big job to start stripping down to be connected and a responsible kaitiaki within our modern context, but it's worth doing now so that our son grows up with a different reality, with a narrative that we want to reconstruct for him. I was just passing it over to the
I'm seeing Jean said, "Kare, I can't afford organic material, linen clothes, they're expensive," and that highlights the point that there's also this emerging kind of like bougie, you're organic, like, you know, and how do we reconcile that with whānau? There's that part around the whakaaro between poverty rates of Māori and ability to practice manaakitanga, to practice this kind of growing. Everybody used to grow organic. There wasn't organic back in the day because everything was organic. Just that. I think that was a really good point being brought up in this.
That's a really important point. No,
that's the reality of the situation we're in, and I think it's important to note, like, we have to be easy on ourselves about these things, because you know, there's a lot of hara that we're committing every day, and if you analyze each one and realize the environmental impact that we're having upon our taiao, it's overwhelming. And even when you become aware of those things, you can't even just willingly stop participating, because by being born into this world, you signed up to it. It was involuntary, and now you just have to go with it because those are the cards you were dealt. And that's sad, it's the truth, but that's why I think, like, be easy on ourselves. If you can afford to buy the kai that you can afford, it's not organic, kei te pai, you know, just we're all out here doing our best, and you know, hopefully as you go on this journey, you can find other ways to you know, have less of an impact. For instance, you know, like you know, when you go to buy clothes, if you can go to a second-hand shop and look at labels when you buy them, and try to make sure you're buying natural materials. You know, that's just one little idea about like how to navigate that. But I know it's hard because, you know, you might have a baby and he's growing and changing sizes every month, and so you just need the easy option. So, you know, just do what you got to do. And I think, you know, the other thing is, I'm just going to kind of take this conversation to a bit of a larger kind of space, but like when we think about you know, our place in this world as te ira tanata, you know, we make up a small but formidable portion of the Earth's identity, but by no means do we define it. And the more that we disconnect from the taiao and nature, the faster we will meet our peril. And that's a bit doom and gloom, but this is how I feel at ease about life, journeying on this treacherous, you know, path to try to live in a way kia mamake na tapu waikarungia papatuanuku, so that I can tread lightly. But you know, our story, our experience of coming into this world as tūhoi is that Te Maunga Nui was a big comet smashed into Henupū Kohurangi, and they begat the first people, which was Ngā Pōtiki. And then people came from Hawaii, they mixed and married and had more offspring. And then later on down the track, Tūhoe appeared. Now that story, if we think about from a scientific evolutionary kind of perspective, the Earth was created, I think, something like 6 billion years ago through asteroids smashing together. And then that clump of rock and nutrient and mineral got trapped in the sun's gravity, and just the right place, not too close, not too far, all of the ingredients was delivered from rangi, from io matua kore, and then life unfolded from there. And eventually, Tāne fashioned the first person and breathed life into her. And he continues to breathe life into us today. Now, the whole, where I'm trying to get with this is that, you know, our tipuna are ancient. Papa Tuanuku is ancient. And she has seen so many beautiful life forms come and go and come and go. Ko rangi, kei runga, ko papa kei raro, ko wā kōrua uri katoa kei waenga nui. E hea ke nā tīni reanga me nā mano o nā momo ko takahiaketia te ara I mua I a mātou. Mate mai, ora mai. Hinga mai he te kura, ara mai he te kura. Pai heretia. So they say that there's less than 1% of all of the species and life forms that have ever existed on Earth are still here today. The other 99 point whatever % of those life forms are gone forever. And some of them were amazing and beautiful. We're talking the dinosaurs. How amazing is a dinosaur? But, you know, even they suffered extinction. And there's no reason why we as humanity are safe from that as well. Now, it'll be really unfortunate if you know, things unfolded and our time on this earth is brought short. That would be really sad, because we are amazing. You know, we have this beautiful ability to be conscious of the world and understand it and apply, you know, our imagination to analyze and have a perspective and interact with and participate in this ecosystem. So it'll be really unfortunate if we don't, you know, fix things up. But I think we don't have to feel too heavy about what's going on. We just have to do something, you know, like grow, if you can, whatever you can do within your means, whatever that looks like. If you have a little backyard with a tiny space, or maybe you've only got a concrete apartment, you can put a raised bed in there, bring in some soil. You know, you can walk more, cycle more, whatever. There's so many things we can do. So we've got to try, don't focus on what you can't do, just try to focus on what you can do and start there. Because otherwise, yeah, we just feel like we've got no hope and we feel pessimistic. So just do what you can, whānau, whatever your position is, whatever your means are, and kei te pai, don't worry too much.
I think that coming off that is that narrative, right? So understanding your own kind narrative. Like my narrative is different to Jared's narrative in the past, right? But our narratives are starting to feed into each other and become more of a journey side by side. But beforehand, our childhoods were our food narratives as children couldn't have been as far apart as, you know, like I grew up on the harbour with fish galore and kumara and manuka honey, right? My whānau milked our own cows, and so I had all of this real rich nutrient dense kai as a child, and that is the most privilege you could be born into. I think that's an incredible privilege. It's one of those good privileges. But then Jared's story is something on the opposite end of the spectrum. And it's about recognizing that we all are agents of change, whether big or small, incremental or all at once. And it's really important for us as individuals and as whānau to address the narrative we inherit, right back to ngā maunga and papa tuanuku and tāne mahu tahine ahuone, all of that, right back to that, to our current state, to our own immediate experiences, and then construct and address all of those, the amazing richness of being an Indigenous person in modern times, but also the traumas that come with that narrative, address them, work through them, so that we can construct a reality for uri whakaheke that is one that isn't born into this kind of deficit or kind of nutrient void diets and all these kind of things. So making sure that we can be the agents of change and being hopeful that we can do this. It'll look different for everybody else. It's not like going to some bougie ass refillery and getting, you know, $100 worth of chickpeas. You know, there isn't like one size fits all for this journey. It's about responding relative to our narratives, relative to our taiao, and making the changes that feel right, ki roto I tō puku, in that real innate space, and making those changes either incrementally or go all out, whatever. Kei a koe tērā, and it's not for anyone else to decide what that looks like. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, just thinking about, because I totally, it can be exhausting and makes you kind of want to give up some days to realize kind of what you're up against. And I think it's really important just to name that colonization as like an ongoing process. And I think about Protect Pūtiki out at Waiheke, who are actively trying to protect the korora over there from ongoing development. And it's not just a matter of like this thing that's happened, but it's ongoing, and it will, and there's a violence in it. We have to recognize that there's that colonization will enact violence if needed to maintain the status quo, to maintain their dominance. And so I think that allows me some kind of relief to know that even as I try my best every day, sometimes I fumble things, and that's kei te pai tēnā, but it's not because of anything inherent in me, or it's not because of anything that I'm lacking in terms of ability or capacity, but it's because we're up against violent forces that are ongoing and honestly like relentless. And I think when I just think about what Rangimārie said about the way that her and Jared's narratives of food are merging now, I think that can be a real solution to moving forward, is that all of our mini narratives become merged and complex. And I think our window of agency can increase, like the ability for us to enact transformation or to become world makers can grow the more we work in community and kind of meet each other's where we can't all show up, someone else shows up. And so I think working together can really help us respond to the very visceral experience of colonization and how it allows us or doesn't allow us to interact with food systems on any given day.
It really reminds me of, you know, as you were saying, like that innate violence, and they're power projections, they're power projections of a system that is basically the biggest, baddest through its progress. You know, survival of the fittest. If we even think about us as tangata and our evolution, you know, we got to a certain point where our the cortex or something was, you know, we developed in our brains to such an extent, found out fire, and then through fire we were able to cook, pre-digest our food, then to give more energy to the development of the brain, and then we kicked everybody, all the other humanoids, asses, so to speak. But you know, that's still happening. It's still happening. But instead of like maybe not nation states, or it happens in nation states too, but not as groups of people, but as systems. Systems now take that, and we're caught up in that systems that's still projecting power, that's still projecting that innate violence of I'm going to be here and I'm going to control everything. yeah, main tangents. We're like, there's so many things we could be one. Mai te rangi ki te whenua. And I think we've talked a lot about the social aspects, the whys, our whys and our background. I'm just conscious of time, and I really do know that you have a lot of practical how stuff that you've been implementing, that you've been learning. I know, you know, your kaupapa around educating your own communities, and some of the things that your wawata, your hopes, your aspirations for your own communities that our whānau listening might be able to take some inspiration from, some practical tips and how-tos, and also all of that stuff. I don't know if you've got any whakaaro around that, or some presentation you might. I just want to also give you that time in case you have prepared anything. But yes, can we move into some of the hows? You know, what are some of those solutions that our whānau might be able to practice in their own lives and in their own spaces?
I think to awesome whakaaro to shift into that more pragmatic korero, because there are some really awesome things, not only us, but that are happening all around the motu. I think just to weave from what Haylee talked about, which was around, you know, we don't have to be the us as individuals don't have to be the absolute answer for that, the complexity of our world. So the importance of community in this space becomes, you know, much more of a talking point, because we actually should be balancing each other out. And you know, our whānau down there who are awesome at kumara gardens, and us here with our food forests, and my koroa over the hill with his fish, you know, we should all actually reliance on each other, we should be building those connections so that we're toha atu toha mai, and we're becoming responsive to our local knowledge and local environment of what actually our taiao here wants to be. You know, it wants to be a forest. Build a forest. The taiao over there, flat, amazing, rich soils for kumara gardens, be a kumara garden and connect and build that complexity of food and diet by exchange. Not financial exchange, but tēnei mana o tēnei kai, me tēnei mana o tēnei kai whakawhiti. And I think community is a massive part of the solution to the violence of the system around us. I can do this, Jared, if you want to talk.
Oh, sure. So we're just bringing up a few slides of some of the wānanga that we've hosted based on basically creating food systems. But I guess just to start off with, I think to answer your question, Kawati, like practical steps about moving forward with, you know, growing your own nutritious kai, all of those sort of things, I think really important to just firstly acknowledge that it is a journey. It's not like you arrive at some kind of point of competency and then all of a sudden you're just like growing your entire diet. It's something that takes a bit of time, and you try something and it might not work, and that's okay. Just observe what's going on, reflect on how you can improve it, watch some YouTube, whatever it is, to make sure you're having some success. But yeah, like it's a journey, and it takes time to reacquire the knowledge and the practice of growing kai. And that's something that, you know, I was deprived of as a kid. I was just telling Kawati the other day that when I was a kid, dinner time would come and then dinner time would go, but then the dinner itself wouldn't show up. And, you know, we were pohara, we were really pohara, but we had enough. And my mum done her best. But I guess just, you know, to explain that, you know, in my lifetime, one generation where that connection to our papa kāinga and growing kai there was taken away from me and my experience growing up, has been reversed in one generation. Now my son is growing up completely opposite. He's going to grow up where gardening and growing a food forest and how to manage and maintain those our food system is going to be innate, intuitive, because he's growing up with that, not having to go pay for a course to learn about that stuff. But anyway,
I was just wondering, I just wanted to put it out there in case you fellas needed a paku break at all. If not, all good, because I don't want to break the flow. But if you wanted a little quick whare paku break or wai break or whatever, kea kurua. Or you want to just keep
it? Me and Rangi can, one of us can tap out and carry on. Yeah.
Or whānau, if you fellas need to go for a break or whatever, whānau, just chill, haere to.
Yeah, all good. We'll just flick through the things. But yeah, anyway, sorry whānau to go on a little bit there. But yeah, I think the most important thing to start that journey into growing kai is to do something. You can watch all the YouTube and read as many magazines or whatever you want, and that's great, that's good. It's important to equip ourselves with mātauranga, but the real learning happens when you go and do it. And you might not have access to much, like say land if you live in the suburbs, and you don't really have, you rent the place and your landlord has said, no, like I don't want you digging up the ground. I guess after that, it's about like, okay, well, what community garden spaces are available, or who else has a garden that I know locally that I can go and help and maybe, harvest. Yeah, so it's just, that's the big key thing. Start, like do something, and you'll probably fail and make mistakes. We just are constantly making mistakes and learning from it, and then trying something again and improving it, and we're getting somewhere eventually. That's taku whakaaro tuatahi e tā, just tīmata, start, do something.
And I think one of the big things that we've learned in terms of trying to build local capacity, mātauranga, but also leadership as well, like building the people who are in there hungry as for not only real kai, but kai o te hinengaro and mātauranga, is to actually start taking our community into spaces of thriving food systems. So this is where Permadynamics comes in, who's a organic, what do you call them?
They are
permaculture experts.
Yeah, they're basically, they just live a way of life where they are super connected to their kai, and they really participate with a positive impact upon the food system, the food forest, their gardens, and the way they build and do everything. They've got a really beautiful, holistic way of living life, of growing beautiful kai, and sharing that with the community through the workshops they offer, through their Patreon. They have a Patreon, which is basically an online platform where they give little videos that just give you tips and stuff. So definitely promote anyone who really wants to learn. Go and check out Permadynamics. They've been a really big inspiration for us.
What they have is this 15-year-old food forest that is, 90 to 95% of their diet comes from their whenua right in front of them. And so that to us was so inspiring, that kind of lifestyle could exist, because even though I was brought up here with a lot of kai from our whenua and our ocean, we still got a lot of our kai from the supermarket and all of those supplements. But so what we did is we chucked a whole heap of hokianga peeps in a van, and we went down and immersed our community in these food systems to, one, understand that it can happen, that it can exist, that we can have these food systems that have all those feedback loops that are happening. And that for our whānau was so inspiring, but also really challenging, because what we think about gardening is like these little boxes or whatever, and there's annuals that grow that you have to keep replacing, potting mix that you put in, or compost that you get from external sources. Whereas when we immerse them in the permadynamics environment, they could see how they generated their own composting systems through goats, through growing plants to feed the goats, then turning their tūtai into composting, and then
the goat's tūtai.
Oh, the goat's tūtai, and then into soil. And so just those little feedback loops to actually see them in real life helps us aspire towards something larger. It doesn't mean you were going to go back and then be like, we need goats, we need all these things. It just means, oh, we can do this, whānau. You know, there are living examples of this, of food systems that are intact and that are gentle on the environment, that put people within the systems and not external to as consumers.
So what would some of the practical things that one would learn going there, or what were some of those practical things that you might be able to just share with the whānau a little bit of those methods of growing, or the framework, I suppose, of like this food forest? People hear about food forests, people hear about annuals. I'm sure you're going to talk about it. So I interrupted you.
Kei te pai. Yeah. Well, I guess there's kind of different levels of engagement when it comes to thinking about and enacting growing our own kai. For a lot of people, they'll have minimal resources and space available to grow their kai, and they'll have to bring in a lot of inputs to underpin their growing of their kai. I guess like the way that I like to think about food is more about a system and creating an ecosystem that's self-reinforcing. There's a lot of relationships existing between the different components of a food system. You might have your gardens, and you might have a compost heap, and those interact. You might have some goats, maybe if you have the space for them, milking goats, and then you've got some pigs as well. You eat the cheese and drink the milk from those goats, and the excess from that you feed to the pigs and fatten those pigs up, and then you get some meat, and then all of them are doing tūtai and mimi, and that's trickling into into your wood chips or whatever you have, your hay, and that's turning into compost, and that compost goes and sits in your garden and replenishes your garden, and then you've got your food forest or your orchard, and you're taking branches and fodder, leaf fodder, and feeding that to your animals. And anyway, sorry, I'm just trying to explain that a food system is much more than it's like a food system isn't just a mara. A mara is a beautiful thing and great, anyone can grow it, but when you can start pairing up all of these various aspects and components of a food system, when you can allow your animals to interact beneficially with your garden and your food forest, and that's when we start talking about this is a food system. It's an ecosystem that's self-reinforcing, it's robust, it's resilient because it's dynamic, and there's a lot of different components holding it up as pillars. So I guess just to start off with like that, when we say food system, that's what we're talking about. It's kind of self-fulfilling, self-fertile, with minimal external inputs. So we're not having to go and drive and use fossil fuels to go to Kaitiakitang to pick up some compost that was, made, who knows where, somewhere else. And we've got this big fossil fuel imprint, and then we've got like all of this compost, which we don't know what's in it. We bring it home, and so it's that idea, minimal external inputs. So we want to actually be able to create everything we need on site here at home to create a fertile environment to grow nutritious kai. And, that's hugely talking about ana tiratanga, mana motiake. Because the more you have to rely on going to the shop to grow, to purchase your seedlings, your little plants that you go and put in your veggie garden, then the more, the less control you have over your kai and the less connected you are. Once again, just want to refer back to just do what you can within your means. Not everyone has the time and skills and expertise to grow, to do all of this. But like I said, this is a journey, and you just start here. And if you get excited and passionate, then you move on to the next level, and you just carry on proceeding like that. Yeah, so I realize that
I think there's a couple of things in the comments which are worthy of addressing at the moment, which is around the context, right? So within urban spaces, within lower socioeconomic spaces, like what does this look like? And I think it's really important that what we're presenting to you now is an incredibly unique and privileged space, because we've got whenua, where we've got space to put tanks in and all that kind of stuff. But actually, it's really important for us to have this discussion around what it might look like in more urban, more rural. No, urban
yeah.
settings, because majority, 89% of New Zealanders are urban. So what does that look like? And community is a massive one, because we can't be it all. We can't be the full package, and yes, we have to juggle jobs and mortgages. We have to, just getting food on the table is hard enough for some people. So it is really important for us to probably have a korero around what that might look like in an urban setting, and what are some tips we might be able to explore in terms of that space. So what we learned from this process in terms of our community building was how important your collective is, how important your community is, and building skills, knowledge across the board, because we couldn't have planted our food forest with just me and Jared. We had a baby, which took me out of a lot of the manual labor. We had a hill which had no terraces, lots of grass, and so it was so important to us that we actually went out and pulled the community together around this project. That was the make or break of it, was we had so many hands to help, but we could build in that knowledge acquisition and that learning in the process. That can exist in urban settings as well. It's going out and having a look what is actually in your neighborhood. And it's quite easy when you I've lived in a city, easy to just stay in your house and not really know what's going on or connect with your neighbors. But a generation ago, when I'd go home and my koro, who's 99, he would ask, do you know your neighbor who lives next to you? And I'd be like, oh, nah. He goes, why not? Why don't you know who that person is? Because you spend most of your time at home. You should be connecting with the person for safety reasons, for kai reasons, like all of those they're really simple acts that we can do to build that connection with our community in these urban settings.
Absolutely. I'm reminded just on that practical level of the mini food forest, as it were, or the guilds that we that anyone with a little piece of land can build or grow rather, which integrates both annual kai. So you got your mara, your mahinga in that system, but it also has those canopy layers as well. And I think one of the cool things that people in urban spaces can do is test that out. And there's heaps of ways to do that. But do you see that as a way of like hybrid mahinga kai, food forest? Yeah, he rau taki pia tērā mo te hunga hei whakamātai?
Aye. Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge, and I think our tuahine Haylee's been alluding to this a lot in this korero, which I love, is that we me ātatiro hia te taiao, me kukume mai nā akorana ki roto i āmahi kairangi te whenua. So I think what a big thing we need is to be able to lend strategies, phenomena and patterns and systems that occur naturally in the world by nature, by papa tuanuku, by tāne mahuta, all our atua, we need to observe and learn from them because they are the masters of ecosystem and creating systems that can perpetually provide and grow exponentially in abundance. And if you think of a native, an ancient native forest is the perfect example. It is so abundant and it's so dense. It's a struggle to walk through. Sometimes there's just so many plants going on, there's so much going on, and it's so rich and lush. No one's watering it. No one's putting fertilizer in it. Those plants self-arranged themselves in a way that was optimum for all of them to survive. Because all plants have different needs, you know, like some can only live in full sun, some can only live in full shade, some are somewhere in between, some have high water needs, low water needs, and somehow our ngahere arranges itself perfectly on its own. So I guess in general, what I'm wanting to say is that just because we're out here in a rural setting and we've got a bit more land to use than someone in an urban setting might have, I think same principles, same concepts apply. Because if we just keep going the way we are, where, you know, where this cooperating food system is just non-existent, you know, you got like your food is bought in from overseas or whatever, and then you buy it, and then the scraps go into the rubbish, and then that goes to the landfill, and there's just no connections of mutual benefit. We need to move away from that in general, and we have to look to the taiao more to inform our strategies on all scales of growing kai, urban level, backyard, rural. And it's easy for me to sit here and just say that. And, you know, I'm fortunate to have been on a journey for the last 5 years, quite intensively learning about that and now implementing it. But, you know, if we want to have a good shot at restoring our environment, something's got to change. You know, we have to find new ways and bring into the modern day a lot of the ideas and values that our tupuna used to exist in harmony, even though they made mistakes too. You know, we've got a lot of extinct birds and deforestation upon their arrival to Aotearoa. They weren't perfect, but they found a point of balance. Yeah, whatever scale, yeah, we something's got to change, and yeah, I think our taiao has the way to show us.
Just to add to that, I think like not everyone likes to do mara, or like not even that, but sometimes people are really passionate about different things, and that might be foraging, or that might be fishing, or that might be hunting. And I think the responsibility that you have to te aki taiao changes depending on where you are and what you love to do. And I think if we can be compelled and driven by our passions, I personally think that's the best way to go about engaging in food systems. Even if what you're doing doesn't allow you to engage directly as a gatherer or a grower, what you can do is be in community with those that you know have good taiao practice, and who you know are kind of conveying the practice that you would use if you had capacity to do it. And so I think there's lots of ways that we can engage in food systems. We're engaging in them whether we like it or not. We have to eat to survive. And so I think if we can think about eating in relation, so what kind of relationships does the food that we eat invoke? If we're like, are the products we're buying upholding land destruction overseas? And when we think about climate change now, it's clear that those decisions, even though they happen overseas, you know, even though they might be happening in America, that has implications for us too. And so we can't just turn a blind eye because we buy something from the supermarket and land or water somewhere is desecrated, like we have to be actively involved in the whakapapa that's invoked when we come into relation with food, however that might be.
Just conscious of our time, and there might be some pātai here that I've been looking at, and some of the korero have delved into the answers for those pātai, but if you've seen any of these pātai that may not have been touched upon, te rapea me tiro here, me tiro, me te whakauti hoki. Yeah, there's a pātai around here. What are your thoughts around the housing crisis and the most fertile lands being built on? You know, our use of those really fertile lands for things that, again, te aro ki taiao, ki te tiro ki ngā tohu, or te taiao saying, what does that piece of land want to be, or most best to be used for? Yeah, around all that kind of stuff.
I think there's we have to be, like Jared was saying earlier, gentle on ourselves, because systems are super complex and massive, right? We're part of a global food system, and that means you know, 30% of the world's wheat is now probably not going to exist in 2022 because of the war going on in Ukraine, you know. And so those kind of things can just like and freak you out, you know, and start feeling so big that you actually get yourself overwhelmed and you freeze. And so you know, and you start becoming anxious and all of these things that actually are all barriers to us working smarter, imagining better futures, all of those things. So we do need to take some self-care in the process of understanding systems. As you scratch the surface, you realize that systems are a whole heap of cogs moving, and over here is housing crisis, and over here is the development of fertile land, and over here is the fashion industry, and all of that stuff. Scale and understanding where your kind of immediate impact can exist is your best first step, is understanding your own narrative and your, you know, from past to present to future, and then starting to tackle what your immediate actions and impacts can be. You can then start expanding out and being more active as a global citizen, or more active as advocate for food sovereignty on a national scale. But first and foremost, just understand your own context, so that you've built that foundational standpoint where you can define yourself within the system, you can understand your position within the system, and then you can start picking off the cogs that you are passionate about and that you think you can have some kind of impact or influence, or that you're just curious about. But I think you have to be careful not to let it spiral out of control where you get freeze, you know, and you just think, oh my gosh, where do I even start? And because there are so many points that you feel like they're so big that, you know, you can't really even act on them. So yeah.
And to answer the question to the point, like my personal opinion is it's he momo, you know, it's a waste of beautiful whenua that should be used for something else, for growing kai and feeding people. And I guess to just jump on the tack that Rangi was taking, is that I guess it's like by focusing on all of these negative practices and things that are going on, is that serving you? Is that giving you the energy you need to do good things, to serve the taiao? And if not, is it worth investing your energy and thought into? Yes, it is in many cases, but in other cases it's not. And so I think for me, that's one way I navigate all of the disheartening things that I see. It's like, is there anything I can do about it? Kyle, does it serve me to keep investing energy and emotion into it? Kyle, okay, well, I got to try to put that off to the side and move ahead. But yes, he tino momo tera. Why are we not defining the building of houses and where it goes by, you know, by the best use of that whenua? And of course, there's a massive, mammoth system at play that's saying, nah, this is where the house is going to go because it's most convenient, it's going to be most cost effective, and I'm going to make the most money.
I do see a pātai around composting toilets.
Hey, I thought you'd bring that up.
No, mate.
Do you wanna... Tātou.
Pātai pai. So shall I? Oh, do you want to...
Well, I think the composting toilet thing's really important because it's that korero around kai and waste, right? Like they are interrelated, they are interconnected, and it's not only waste as in plastic waste, kiriho, that our food is packaged in, but waste as in, like, what do we do with our tūtai and our mimi, and how does that work? Because majority of us would be on septic systems where out of sight, out of mind, disappears and then ends up in our waterways, right? So composting toilets are really interesting korero because it's hairy, it's tricky because, you know, you need to because kai and that para,
Takahi tikanga.
yeah, and it's a tricky domain to navigate. So I'm going to pass to Jared.
So firstly, do you guys use a compost toilet, and what is it?
Yes, we do. So yeah, I guess just to establish that, you know, within te ao Māori, we don't like to mix human excrement with anything that is tapu, like, you know, and we don't like to mix it with food or spaces where food is going to be grown or food is going to go. That's why we don't put our bums on tables, because it's just too close of an association from our tūtai, which, you know, it smells it just naturally kind of has an off-putting aroma that you know, like it's a no-brainer. Don't try not to associate it with your kai, because there's pathogens in it, why not? But a composting toilet is basically a toilet where you take responsibility for your tūtai. Generally, your tūtai goes into some kind of bucket rather than being flushed away somewhere, and you add a lot of carbon to it, wood chips or whatever you have, and when the time comes, then you go and put it in some kind of compost pile or some kind of system, a worm farm or something that then processes it and turns it into soil. And so looking at this, the end product, it's not tūtai anymore, it's actually changed on a chemical level, and now it is soil. Now, a lot of people in general, but especially Māori, will have issues about how do you use that, because you don't want it to be, you know, like in your mara where you're growing your kumara. No, that's a big desecration of tikanga. But you know, I think there's a way to be able to take control and autonomy and be responsible for our tūtai in a way that is so much better than the current conventional way that our tūtai, our poos and wees is being dealt with. Because think about it, there's no rangatiratanga o mana motuhake o Kaitiakitang in the way that we currently deal with our poo. The majority of people, this is a position you're forced into, but you poo in your toilet, wee in your toilet, that gets flushed away to a septic tank, and then someone comes about once every 5 years and they suck it up into their truck, and then they take it to a processing plant, and then it gets processed with chemicals and other things, and then in our case it gets flushed into the Hokianga harbour,
and then we eat the fish.
Then you go and get your kai from the harbour. Now that, you know, that in itself is the most explicit takahi of mana on the Hokianga harbour. To add to it, the processing plant is old and it doesn't do a very good job at it. So for me to take responsibility of processing my own tūtai, that's a massive act of rangatiratanga. It's me taking responsibility and actually turning something that is seen as a burden, as paru, as you know, it's just seen as something to be flushed down the drain, swept under the rug and forgotten about. For me to be able to actually turn that into something that is going to go back into the whenua and replenish the whenua, it really makes me feel like I'm taking responsibility, and I'm doing a good thing. And in terms of its use, yeah, we don't put it on our mara. I am happy to put it around trees, especially because even fruit trees, I don't mind saying that, because our fruit trees, you know, the hua that come from our fruit trees, those hua are never in touch, they never contact that soil. And if an animal in the wild does a poo on the ground, within, you know, a week or two, in a proper highly functioning ecosystem in a nahere, it's gone, you don't see it. And the same thing happens with our tūtai.
Hey, so just a point of clarification, because I want to really get this point clear. There's a process that goes through by which it transforms from one state, ne, the state of being tapu, ne, he para tangata, and there's a robust system that it goes through of transformation from that state to soil by biological processes, time, microbiome, the biome in the soil, composting, and then because I think that's a really, really important point. You know, te hunga whakarongo, they might be like, what are these fellas talking about tūtai and on a kai panel? But it's intrinsically linked to the systems of consumption and waste of us as tangata, and where that then goes to into our taiao. Because he horekau ke he rereketanga, he māwehetanga, we're all in this taiao, and as you said, bro, but that's a really clear point. There is a transformation from one state of the tapu, and this is the wānanga, to another state. Now, does that state become noa? At what point does that state become a state of ko Māori, it's part of taiao again? And yeah, because I think it's a really, really important point that we all should understand about this process, if that's something that you want to experiment with and look into. That transformation process is really important, and there's steps, and to know and know that it comes out at the other end as not that state, but as soil.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I also just want to introduce our whānau to another framework for composting toilets, which is called the long drop.
Which is not composting toilets.
It's not, it's different, but in the end, you know, it's kind of the same. It's just less involved.
Like on that point though, I think there's a whole heap of magical processes that happen in kai systems. So there's the transformation of para tangata into soil, and that goes through all these processes. There's also every day that you cook a meal, that's a magical transformation of these hua into a combined thing of a new state, right? And so it's about bringing back some of those rituals and ritualizing these processes so that we could recognize that it goes from this state of rawness to this state of usability, of higher nutrients, of different into a different context, that it becomes usable in a different space. And that's where like our rituals and our tikanga can actually help play a part, right? From using our karakia, not only to be grateful for the elements, the elemental forces that have been in play to create that hua, but also to take that hua and to put it into a place of digestibility, of higher nutrients, of palatability, like all of those things. And that happens the more we open our consciousness to all of those different magical happenings in our daily life, the more we become just like part of our systems, right? Part of cooking every night. Yeah, totally can be a drag. Sometimes we have porridge for dinner. Yeah, definitely. But actually, when I think about it at a deeper level, every time I cook a meal and provide kai for my whānau or my manuhiri, I'm actually giving them the ability to ingest our outside world, giving them the ability to change how their inner system's working. And that is an incredible privilege of manaaki, to give people high nutrient kai that feeds and nourishes them internally. And so I think those rituals need to come back alongside kai. It's not just about reclaiming our, growing a mara here, but also bringing back those cultural practices that allow us to recognize transitions and transformations of kai, of waste, and all of that.
And working in with biological processes, as you said, like, using worms, using time and the microbiology through those processes, and being part of that, like the food forest. You're being part of a food forest. You're coming in and chopping and dropping and assisting the mulch to go in different places. And that is us engaging with taiao again, engaging with natural processes again. And I love that, Rangi. I love that, that privilege of being able to, manaaki in that way when we're talking about kai. Wow, boom. Just having a look at these other korero. I think it was a apartheid around, when you are a single parent, trying to manage all this as well, and how to encourage single parents, isolated whānau that don't have that village structure around them, and may to go out and do the mahi in a totally new environment, community gardens, etc. He whakaaro, wāpurua.
Haylee, do you have any whakaaro on that one before we jump in?
I think, again, just to broaden our understandings of kai systems, that it doesn't always have to be mara. And I think maybe even might be relevant for those in urban spaces. It might be a matter of just like finding a bush nearby, or finding an awa, finding a moana, and being in a relation with that taiao, as opposed to, like, sometimes it's not always easy to start with people. Sometimes it's easier to start with taiao and just observe different tohu. When we were in Puketika, you look down at the ground and you see koroi berries on the ground for the first time. And I've never seen koroi berries until that moment, but it's only because we walked in that bush every day that we could notice and really see all these really small changes in the way that these trees were calling us to notice them, because they're trying to be pollinated, so they're bright or they smell good, or and so they're calling us too into relation to see them and recognize them. And I think that can be a cool way to come into the folds of food systems. And we didn't go out with an intention of looking for food, but we found food in the way that the trees were communicating, or the piko was ready to be picked. And so I think that's a good place that you can start if you don't have necessarily human community. And you might find people out in the ngahere or in the awa who do kind of, or are thinking about the same things as you, or want to develop or learn in the same way that you are as well.
I think for our whānau who maybe don't have access to a village, and we know of them, they might be our whānau ourselves, we need to actively go and be that village for them. Like, parenting's hard enough when you got two people and one child, that 2 adults to 1 child's also a challenging ratio, let alone 1 adult to multiple children. And we have to actually take responsibility for our whānau, or the people within our spaces that we can see have some massive challenges and need manaaki, and we have to actually get up and be that active kai manaaki kia rātou, rather than asking them to create the village for themselves. I think there's a responsibility on our behalf to actually create village for others as well, and just shower the people who need it the most knowledge and kai and resources that we may have at our disposal. So really important to humble ourselves as well in terms of us having these aspirations and these drives to be self-sufficient or whatever, but also we have to be part of our society and part of our human relationships as well. And that means that maybe over here we slow down so that we can give to those people, to the people who need it more than us for this moment in our journey. It is really, that human connection is really, really important to foster, as well as our taiao connections and our taiao responsibilities. It is all around that responsibility to be part of that tangata and taiao, you know, and to be nurturers of both.
You mentioned resources, and we had a little partai around that. What are some of the really have been awesome resources for you guys? You did mention thermodynamics as an ātinana place, but yeah, have you got any resources that people can go to learn more about maybe some of the practices or methodologies or philosophies that you've learned? What might some of those be, and where might people be able to go to find them?
Good question.
The probably biggest resource that we have utilized is the internet, YouTube, reading articles. That's been the biggest thing for us to learn, because nowadays pretty much everyone has some form of access to the internet. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to start there. If you want to grow some broccoli, just go and type that into YouTube, and there'll be a nicely packaged up video waiting there for you. And the other thing is, I think seeing real life examples of really inspiring gardens and orchards and food forests, and so if you are able to go and visit anyone, there might be some kind of community food forest or community gardens, or you might just know someone who has mean gardens. Might be your nan and she's got the most beautiful traditional flower garden or whatever it is. It's really important to go and see it and experience it and have the opportunity to ask questions. So yeah, those are probably the two biggest things that I would encourage you.
Any specific kind of places? I know for a fact that you've been to the Agro Food Academy. Like if people want to follow up specific food forest related stuff, or anything of it.
Yeah, well, there's a channel on YouTube called Happen Films. They do really beautiful videos about just people living their life in a way that they're treading lightly on the earth, and they're doing interesting, innovative, creative, original things. So they've got some really cool examples of food forests and other things in their lineup of videos. So Happen Films, go and check them out. Permadynamics, as I mentioned earlier, they're awesome. Papatuanuku Marae, if you live in Auckland and have an opportunity to go there, I would highly encourage that.
Koanga Institute with their heritage seeds, you know, that's an incredible place, and they do workshops. Yep,
Whenua Warrior. Yep, Whenua Warrior, check out what they're doing in Auckland. Amazing mahi. So Whenua Warrior, currently they're about halfway through planting 600 backyard gardens in people's backyards. 600 gardens for people in South Auckland. And that's Kelly Marie, who's responsible for Whenua Warrior. So big mihi to her and Whenua Warrior. So that might be someone's in Auckland. Go to their website, Whenua Warrior, and check out what they're up to.
Isn't that a national as well, not just in Auckland?
I think
so. She's been outside of Auckland. So is that anybody wants her to come and help them build a mahinga, just reach out? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Sasura, I know her current kaupapa is South Auckland specific, but yeah, she's been doing mahi all over.
There's and just on here from Nikki, the puka puka. So one of the biggest transformational puka puka for me in terms of kai and cooking, which cooking is something we can change like that, right? It's something we can immediate, is that book up there, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. I'll just get it for you. Where it tells you about all of the kind of key elements to cooking, which is salt, fat, acid, and heat. And how salt actually transforms kai, and how to use heat and how to cook through observation rather than the dial on your thermometer. Take that away. Don't think about that. Actually observe what's going on in terms of the heat within your oven. How does fat play into cooking, and the chemicals that happen within all of that process. It's really transformed my understanding of how to take raw food into this magical state of something else and nutrient rich, but the magic of that transformation.
And one other place to look is there's many ways, practices and modalities of growing kai nowadays. There's traditional Māori mara, there's conventional food growing practices, there's permaculture, there's no-dig gardening. What's that, bro?
Sorry, what's permaculture?
So permaculture, it's basically, I think, it's a way of growing kai that places people as a part of the ecosystem, and it understands that the prosperity of humanity depends on the vitality of our wild and natural world, ora taiao, ora tangata. It doesn't say it in those terms, but it's a more natural way of existing and observing patterns in nature and implementing them into your gardens, and it's really cool. There's a lot of really cool strategies in there, and I know that a lot of those strategies are lended from indigenous ideas and whakaaro, so it does resonate with Māori for a lot of people. But yes, permaculture. No-dig gardening is another one that's quite cool. Chop and drop, that's another concept that's really cool. Yeah, so those are just some ideas. Anyway, if you want to go on a bit of a YouTube exploration, those are some cool places to start.
Thanks, bro. That's
And just in summary of that is, talk to your parents, talk to your koroua, your kuia, talk to the people around you, because there's so much knowledge within your community already. And so just having those korero, sitting down, turning up, having a cup of tea, sitting down, having the korero. It's something that we have to kind of actively do now, but that's how we used to share community insights and connections, was just turning up, having a cup of tea, taking a little kai around, and just talking, and just having those like off the cuff wānanga. So definitely encourage that. Just go and talk to your koroua and kuia.
And can't leave this conversation without mentioning hua para kore.
Yeah,
that's another really cool, beautiful practice that's being developed. So you go and check out there. They got some books from Jessica Hutchings and her colleagues. Hua para kore, that's another one.
Yeah, we had an awesome korero with her in November last year as a keynote. Yeah, awesome. Hey, just before we wrap up, because I know it's nearly lunchtime, what if people want to kind of find more about you fellas, any of the kaupapa that you have, whakamohio mai koa, yeah, where people can find you and all that jazz.
Down to dirt right now.
Or any kaupapa that you have in development.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, this is
So, I guess if you wanted to follow along, and we've been a bit slack with sharing some of the things that we're up to, but there are places online you can find some stuff for us. So, Ōnuku is the name of our organisation. You know, because we are all uri of Papa Tuanuku, Ōnuku. So that's our organisation, Ōnuku. And if you go on Facebook, you can find a page there. And I've also recently started a page just to share my own whakaaro and get better at writing and posting and sharing photos and stuff. And that is Red Haku. So yeah, check that out. Whānau, Red Haku, Ōnuku, and that's our main places you can find us. Rangi's also got a collective she's a part of called Oi. She can quickly speak to that.
Yes, Oi Collective kind of works in kind of social innovation and design meets kaupapa Māori meets community development. And so we look at social impact from a range of different perspectives and with the different organisations. So you can hit Crystal, the tuahine Crystal up for that one. Show it, Crystal.
Phenomenal woman, collection of women and friends. Oh, awesome. Well, e te whānau, any final whakaaro before we wrap up for this amazing panel discussion with the two of you, either from yourselves or from Haylee before we wrap up?
Maybe I'll go so that you can be the final closing. But just to mihi to you two for the work you're doing. I'm very new in this role, only about a year, and so I'm learning a lot, and still very much in just when you learn the depth of knowledge that's required to engage in these spaces. You just realize how much of a tainer you are, and that's humbling, and it's also motivating because at the end of the day that ka noho tuakana te taiao, and all we can do is listen as best we can and respond. And but mihi atu ki ngā kai whakarite katoa who are doing the mahi that they do, and sometimes all it is looking after a ngahere and knowing that ngahere will create the ecosystem that enables other people to grow marakai. So there are lots of small and big ways that we can be involved in, which however much you can contribute. Maybe it's just growing healthy tamariki for their first 18 years or whatever, and making sure that they are the kaitiaki that we need. Kei te pai hoki tēnā. So whatever you can give, it's enough.
Love that comment, Sophia. Amazing korero koutou. Love how it has taken us from kai to community to dinosaurs to tūtai to taiao to permaculture and everywhere in between. It's felt like that, eh?
Well, it wouldn't be a wānanga if we didn't get to the mokouki, the dinosaurs, or that's what my son reckons anyway. It ain't worth talking about if it isn't a dinosaur. Aku mihi kia koutou ngā kai whakahaere o tēnei wānanga. Just so important for us to share experience and korero on and how we can look after ourselves, nourish our community and our tamariki, to be gentle on the earth, and to find hope and prosperity and joy and play for not only for us and our immediate existence, but for taupai and our tamariki and their tamariki and so on and so on. So just massive mihi to Toi Tangata. Always puts this beautiful space, it constructs this beautiful space for people to turuku and to whakawhiti kōrero. Really important that we have these discussions, that we might not all share the same views or the same ideas about how to do something, but that we're here to support each other, to push us into new spaces, to critically think about the part we play, and how we might be those agents of change within our own existence. Our story is one story of millions of stories, and we share it, not to make you feel like you're not doing the right thing. We share it so that you might then think, oh, well, I'm going to do it like this, and this is my truth, and this is my reality, and here's my scale of impact. So everybody, massive mihi to everybody who came and listened to us. Now, pau korero mo ngā haura e rua. Ready for kai.
Ready for tūta.
Not at the same time.
Poi whānau, and just from me, my closing korero, just want to express my huge appreciation for being in this space with Haylee Koroi and this lovely lady next to me, and with everyone who's been watching and listening and contributing through the chat, and really thankful to Toi Tangata and all ngā pau whirinaki e hapai tēnei kaupapa meanings, and just wanted to say, like, it's hard not to get excited in these forums, and and sometimes I think, oh, starting to sound a bit righteous here and a bit preachy, but whānau, just want to assure that coming from Ngākau Mahaki, and the passion can get the better of us sometimes, and we just go with the flow, and it just spews out a bit. But so sorry if you felt spewed on.
Wow.
Let me take this to a more beautiful place. But I thought I'll share a little meditative vision of abundance to close off before our karakia. But so whānau, if you'd like to, I invite you to katia nā karu, close your eyes. If you want to, you don't have to. And I'm going to share a vision of abundance. But tuatai, just a couple of deep breaths in. Ha ki ro. Ha ki waho. Fill that puku right up. Ha ki ro. Ha ki waho. One more. Ha ki ro. Ha ki waho. And so imagine it is the peak of summer. You are on your papa kāinga in the company of your extended whānau, and everyone has come together to hākari. The sun beaming down with a light wind rolling from the hills, a breeze that cuts the edge off the hot day. Looking at the spread in front of you, knowing that every morsel before you was foraged, grown and raised by the hands of your whānau from the land upon which you whakapapa. As you prepare to eat, a karakia sounds, blessing the kai and offering sentiments of gratitude for this day, for this food, and for the whenua that produced it. Laid out in front of you is juicy watermelon, Māori potatoes, kumara, lush salad greens, wild pork and fat home-cooked mutton. Sorry, vegans. Sweet corn, avocado, watercress, plums and peaches, all grown organically by the hands of your whānau and the forces of nature. Before the karakia is over, your gaze moves to the surrounding whenua, where a stand of ripe peach and plum trees offers respite from the hot sun. Beyond the orchard, you see the mara grandly spreading its foliage across the whenua. Riwai, kumara, melons, corn, tomatoes, and squash line the rows. A food forest sits between the marae and the mara, a densely planted assortment of native and non-native trees planted in companion with low shrubs, rongoa Māori, and a diverse and abundant range of fruit growing in amongst the chaos. As the karakia closes, hui tai kie, you feel an overwhelming sense of belonging and connection to this place. to the people and to the food you are about to consume. Imagine that. Imagine how proud your tipuna would be to see such a spectacle amongst the dysfunction of the modern world. Imagine how good it would feel knowing that your tamariki and your mokopuna are being nourished in this way. Tuturu whakamaua kia teina.
Teina.
Haunge hui e tai.
Tēnā koe kara, tēnā hoki kōrua. E ngā, aku tuakana, tuahine, tuakana, moenei kōrero kōhora, te kai, he huhua, he momona, kua ruku ki ngā rētōtanga, te kaupapa, rangi tūhāha hoki mai anō. Just mean, thank you. On behalf of everybody here listening, thank you very much for your time, your passion, me tō koha ki te kaupapa. Me te pai tawhiti e waihangati ani. Reira, e te whānau tēnā kōrua. O tira ki a koe Haylee o whakaaro taituara nei tēnā koe. Tēnā tātou e te katoa. Yeah, big mihi. Kia ora.